What's going on? Welcome in the Matt Bernier Show, DRF TV, live.drf.com, livestream.com, the Daily Racing Forms Twitter handle, at DRF Inside Post, as well as the Daily Racing Forms Facebook page. My name is Matt Bernier. You can follow me on Twitter, at Bernier_Matt. This is the recap edition. We're taking a look back at some big racing from this past weekend, the weekend of August the 4th, most notably a couple of grade ones from up at Saratoga on Saturday afternoon. I've already brought up the ways that you can watch this program or listen to it live. If you listen to it in podcast form, like most of you do. YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, video.drf.com, as well as Spotify. If you're over on YouTube, click that subscribe button. All the latest offerings from DRF TV, give us a thumbs up. Also on iTunes, write us a little bit of a review. Give us a nice positive rating. Always, always, always greatly appreciated. Let's kick things off right away with the big one. The Grade 1 Whitney up at Saratoga on Saturday. Here was the field of 8. Everything looked beautiful. All day, sun was shining, a little bit on the hot side, but what do you expect? It's upstate New York at the beginning of August. And then, as can be the case in upstate New York in the middle of August, or the beginning of August, the dark clouds quickly rolled in, just before post time, scheduled anyway, for the Whitney. And we got that deluge that Saratoga is most known for. And this meeting specifically just seems like it's been very, very wet. But this race, it ended up being an absolute sort of washout as far as the weather was concerned. So we had a little delay, but ultimately, they went out there on the track, and you had 3 horses. You had Diversify, Mind Your Biscuits, and Backyard Heaven. They all made sense given a number of different circumstances and situations. But you could also make little cases against them. And if you chose to go that direction, then the question became who else could beat them, or who would you try to beat them with? Really, what it boiled down to was a futile exercise, because there was one horse in particular. The top 2 ran very well, but one horse in particular that just put on an absolute show, and he clearly didn't have a problem. With the sloppy going up at the spot on Saturday afternoon, Larry Colmus with the sloppy stretch run of this year's Whitney.
Diversify in front. Mind Your Biscuits, his fellow New York bred, is 3 lengths behind. Taprit is 3rd on the inside. Discreet Lover is 4th. A furlong to run. In this wet Whitney, it is Diversify. Oh, and he's got a 5-length lead here. Mind Your Biscuits and Discreet Lover will battle for second. Diversify has won the Whitney in style. He took it by 4 over Mind Your Biscuits. Discreet Lover was 3rd and Taprit was 4th in a final time of 1 minute.
Diversify gets the job done as your 8-5 post-time favorite over Mind Your Biscuits, who was the runner-up at odds of 3-1, and the third-place finisher, Discreet Lover, one of my favorites, outruns his odds time and time again, does so again on Saturday, odds of 38-1. He rounds out your trifecta. Let's take a look at the winner a little bit more in depth. Diversify is 10 of 15 lifetime, 12 times in the exacta, just shy of $2 million. In career earnings, owned by Ralph M. Evans and Lauren Evans, trained by Rick Violet Jr., bred by Fred W. Hertrick III and John D. Fielding in the state of New York, ridden to victory by Arad Ortiz Jr. in the pedigree that is at the bottom of the horse card if you're watching. He's by Bellamy Road out of a street cry mare named Rule 1. Now, as far as speed figures are concerned, 110 buyer, 132 time form U.S. rating for Diversify winning the Whitney. Keep in mind, have some sympathy for the figure makers for a race like this, because the track was totally thrown out the window at that point. Once you got that crazy rain that came through, there was really no parallel to be drawn from the rest of the day, and there were no other races run after. There would have been 2 turf races anyway, but they were canceled because how much rain had fallen. So this figure, I think it's accurate, and I think it's good, and time will tell if it stands up. But this is a nightmare for a figure maker, because the track had been one thing all day, and then all of a sudden it's throw it up in the air. Timeform US had 3 of the splits, the internal splits, all color-coded red, meaning the pace was fast. And I tell you what, this was a visually impressive effort from Diversify, and on the clock it was an impressive effort as well. The one thing that I will also throw out there, though, from the Timeform US side of things, they had the main track at Saratoga color-coded as slightly or light blue, meaning it may have been slightly favoring horses coming from off the pace. Now, again, I throw that out there because that doesn't necessarily equate to what this race was like, because the track had changed so significantly. So perhaps for the majority of the day, that's actually what it was playing toward, or playing a little bit more favoring one side than the other. But for this race individually, I just would strongly urge caution using that for a barometer for this effort. simply because the track was just so different than what it was for the rest of the day. Regardless, neither here nor there. When you look and see the way that Diversify ran in here, he is very, very dangerous considering he can go fast and he can go a route of ground and be able to see out at least 9 furlongs, and we've seen him actually do it at 10 furlongs in the Jockey Club Gold Cup last year. The interesting thing here for me with Diversify, the way that he goes out there and just bottoms out a field. That's a tactic to me. If I have a speed horse, that's how I want my horse ridden. Break like a shot, go right to the top. Irad takes no prisoners. Says, we're doing this thing. We're going right to the front, 23-1, 46-2, 10-3 for 3/4. And he rode this horse, to me, this is as good a ride as you're going to see. And it may sound silly because he didn't have to make any decisions about where to put the horse or do X, Y, and Z. The reason I say this is as good a ride as you're going to see is because it reminded me so much of the Fort Larned ride that Brian Hernandez gave in the Breeders' Cup Classic a number of years ago, where going into the far turn, you got to try to let him out a notch, to try to extend, get everybody off, and try to get them all of a sudden saying, well, we got to go and catch him. We got to catch him. Use your speed to your advantage. It's never, ever, ever, ever a good idea to have a horse, a speed horse specifically, where that is your greatest weapon, to let everyone else be right there with you and bring them all into the race. Irad did the total opposite. He said, you got to come and catch me. I'm going to open up, get everybody else off the bridle, and you saw what happened. Diversify just continued on down the lane. The speed figures, they're off the charts. They're tremendous. He's paired up 110 buyers. Rick Violet says, you know what? No matter how good he looks coming out of this race, the Woodward ain't happening. Probably go to the Jockey Club Gold Cup and then probably on to the Breeders' Cup Classic. May sound a little bit funny saying probably the Breeders' Cup Classic, but Violet brought it up that last year at Churchill, he ran in the Clark and he was terrible. And Irad had said he just never got over the surface. Now, you can look at that one of two ways. Let's say he goes out into the Jockey Club and struts his stuff and puts on a show. You'd say, how can you not run him in the Classic, considering you might be the speed of the speed and you might just be the horse, the now horse. You are in the best form. You continue to put up giant speed figures. How could you not run in the Classic? Well, if you don't think the horse can handle the racing surface, do you want to just go out there and sort of fire a dud? I just have a hard time imagining them not going there, but at the same time, I kind of respect the idea that if they say, he can't handle the racetrack, why are we going to go if we can't do it? There are other opportunities and other options, and that is well down the road. We still have a ways to go. But at the end of the day, right now, you've got to look at a horse like Diversify in a division like this and say he is one of the favorites. Now, I had done a seminar earlier in the day with Peter Thomas Fornatal and Mike Watchmaker on Saturday up at Saratoga, and I said, I don't think the Classic winner's coming out of this race. And as much as I love Diversify, and as fast as he's been and as good as the form has continued to be, I still don't really view him as a Classic sort of horse. Mainly because of the distance, not because of the talent. You saw him hop back to his left lead at the end of this race. He hopped back to his left lead at the end of the Jockey Club. This is just something that Diversify does. He hopped back to his left lead at the end of the Suburban, which, again, 10 furlongs, so he can do it, but I don't think that's his best distance. Now, if you want to make the argument that he just bottoms fields out and no one has the opportunity to make up the ground at the end, that's one thing. But you combine 10 furlongs with potentially a racing surface, and I'm just looking at Churchill and the Classic as hopefully what the end game is for this horse. If we get there and he's in raging form, the fact that he didn't really love the racing surface and the connections are a little bit concerned about it, and it's going to be at 10 furlongs. The good thing for a horse like Diversify in a year like this is because it would be a year like this, where maybe this is a little bit of a suspect group that's going to be going down there, but I don't love the idea of him at 10 furlongs because you've got to assume someone else is going to go and try to push the pace as well. And this is not meant to take anything away from this horse. I think he's one of the let's say, 3 to 5 best horses in training right now. I just do wonder about his prospects as a favorite in a race like the Classic, should he get there in good order, which, again, we've got to wait and see. Time will tell. One thing is certain, though. Right now, he's probably boss of the older horses on the East Coast. On the West Coast, there's an argument where you can say it's Accelerate, or you can say it's the lightly raced Catalina Cruiser, or any of these other horses. Perhaps a 3-year-old somehow puts forth, comes up with a big effort, whether it's the Travers or one of these other races. But Diversify is boss of the East Coast right now. Mind Your Biscuits. I thought this was a very good effort from Mind Your Biscuits. First time going 2 turns, and almost in his 30th lifetime start. He's done this thing once or twice. I thought on the far turn, he made that nice brush, made a good move, and he just sort of flattened out down the lane. And I'm not going to hold that against him. He earned a 104 buyer here and a 125 time Form US rating. I do wonder if there's a scenario where if it's a wet racing surface, or a dry surface, rather, maybe the margin of victory is narrowed a little bit. But at the same time, do I really see a scenario? The only scenario I could see Biscuits turning the table on Diversify is if someone pushes Diversify early on and really goes at it, because there is a difference between just going out there and running the way Diversify did, running fast, but you're uncontested, and then running fast and being pressured throughout. If there's someone else that can go with him, then perhaps that's when Biscuits can come with a little bit more of a run. I'm not sold on him at 10 furlongs. I think he can go a distance like this, 1 1/8. Clearly, he looked good doing this. I know Chad Summers had brought up a few different possibilities as far as what the next start would be for Mind Your Biscuits. I think this at least proves, anyway, that you're going to have a horse that can go 9 furlongs. Now, can he go 10? We'll find out if you're thinking classic. To me, I think he is best still going 1 turn, but that doesn't mean that he is incapable of going these sort of longer distances. All things considered, I think the Connections have to be very happy with the way this horse ran. He acquitted himself very nicely on Saturday afternoon. As for the rest of the field, Discreet Lover, love him. Don't think he's a classic type. Don't think he's really grade 1 caliber. But he can continue to cash checks, no reason. Taprit, he was the one closest to the pace that finished, I suppose, the best, but he was still beaten by a country mile. And let's just call a spade a spade. He's just not really grade 1 quality at this point in his career. He's just not. Good Samaritan. I want him back on the turf. I've been saying it for a long time. I want him on the turf. I think he's a better turf horse than a dirt horse. McCracken, I want him turned back to a shorter distance, hopefully 7/8 of a mile. I'd love to see him run in the Forgo. I believe that's on Travers Day, coming up in a few weeks. Backyard Heaven. Man, I don't know what you do now. I know he was close to the pace. Maybe he hated a wet racing surface. This is all on the heels, though, of that disaster down at Churchill. And I think you need to start looking a little bit deeper. And this is something that, as an exercise as a handicapper, everyone should do. We get so enamored looking at the numbers. And you say, wow, he's got 105s, 106s. He shipped out of town. He did this. He did that. He's had physical issues. He popped back to his left lead at the end of that Ali Sheba. That Ali Sheba has not come back strong. So then he goes down to Churchill and he bombs. And you can say, oh, well, it was the humidity and it was this, that, and the other thing. Okay, maybe it was. Confident move for Chad to bring him right back into a spot like this. Goes out there close to a hot pace, packs it in badly. You got an excuse there. Wet racing surface. Got a bit of an excuse there. If you really want to go through and say that if you want to make the case that he is a little bit dirtied on paper, it's your prerogative. I would just caution and say, or he's going the wrong way, or he's already gone the wrong way. I'm leaning toward this horse might need a breather. Just my opinion. This is 2 consecutive bombs. I have a hard time just saying that both of them were because of the circumstances. You're not supposed to be beating a country mile in both of them. If you're going to fold, look, you're better than Taprit. You're more talented than Taprit. At least finished relatively close to him. Taprit blew your doors off. To me, this is an instance where you got to think long and hard wherever Backyard Heaven shows up. And again, knock on wood, hope everything is fine. I think he probably needs a little bit of a breather. I think he's probably better going 1 turn than he is going 2. I personally would love to see him in a race like the Cigar Mile. Make that his goal. We know he can handle Aqueduct. We know 1 turn is his game. I would like to see him there, but it'll be interesting to see what we get from the Connections and where they choose to go with Backyard Heaven. At the end of the day, the Whitney was a show. Whether it was because of the wet weather that just came rolling through and delayed everything about 45 minutes, or because of the smashing effort delivered by Diversify. He is a strong New York bred. The New York breds run 1-2 in this prestigious Grade 1 race. Diversify looks like you got to consider him on the short list of contenders for a race like the Breeders' Cup Classic. A 110 Beyer speed figure, a 132 time form US rating, and it sounds like the Jockey Club Gold Cup will be next on his list. He'll look to defend that title at Belmont Park in October. 3-year-old fillies going 7/8 of a mile on the main track. The field for the Grade 1 test at Saratoga Saturday. You had a nice field assembled here. You had the favorite in Separation of Powers. She was bet down to odds of 2-1. But then you had 3 other horses that went off in the 7-2 range. You had Mia Mischief. You had Alter Moon. You also had Minute to Stardom. Minute to Stardom looked like she could be anything. She's coming in here for Al Stall. She had just blown the doors off her competitors and her competition in her 3 lifetime starts. She would get the acid test here. You had Alter Moon coming up from South Florida. The Florida shippers haven't fared all that well once they got up into New York, but perhaps Alter Moon would be a different situation. And Mia Mischief, most recently, she was just flat in that victory ride. She really didn't do any running, and it was kind of uncharacteristic because she was sort of rock solid prior to that, and she was a fast filly. Separation of Powers, you figured you'd get a better effort from her this time around, hopefully without such a bad stumble that she had in that victory ride. What we got was a fantastic stretch duel. Here is the stretch run of this year's test.
5.73 half, and they're into the stretch. Mia Mischief giving Separation of Powers a battle with a furlong to run. Separation of Powers is on the outside. Mia Mischief just keeps on fighting her. The two of them, tooth and nail at the 16th pole. Mia Mischief so game. Separation of Powers 2. The two of them down to the line. Separation of Powers defeats Mia Mischief in a thrilling.
Separation of Powers gets the job done for Chad Brown at odds of 2-1. She prevails by a neck over Mia Mischief, who ran too well to lose. She runs second at odds of 7-2. And then Kelly's Humor from the back of the pack, she runs third at odds of 12-1. Let's take a look at Separation of Powers. 3 of 6 lifetime, over $700,000 in career earnings. Owned by Clarovich Stables Incorporated. Trained by Chad Brown. Bred by Northwest Farms LLC in Kentucky. Ridden to victory by Jose Ortiz. And the pedigree at the bottom of the horse card, she's by Candy Ride, of an Empire Maker mare named She Had Me From Hello. 93 Beyer, 116 time form US rating for Separation of Powers, winning this year's test. She prevailed over Mia Mischief, who earned a 92 Beyer, but again, keep in mind, time form US, those figures a little bit different, factor in as far as the pace is concerned and things like that. She actually earns a, I don't want to say significantly faster time form US rating, but she earns a faster one. She earned a 119 as opposed to Separation of Powers with the 116. Now, something else that you may want to factor in. I brought it up talking about the Whitney, where maybe it doesn't really apply to that. But Timeform US had the main track at Saratoga as slightly closer friendly. So perhaps you want to upgrade Mia Mischief, considering she was out there contesting the fractions throughout, and the horses that came and that beat her and ran third, Kelly's Humor came from basically last, and Separation of Powers was mid-pack throughout the run. So perhaps they had the racetrack in their favor as opposed to Mia Mischief, who just, again, I thought ran too well to lose. She dueled with Classy Act. Classy Act finished second to last in this spot. I think it was a giant effort from Mia Mischief. I think it was a giant effort from Separation of Powers. Let's give credit where credit's due. Chad did a good job of getting this filly back to the races and back to her good form. She was top level as far as a 2-year-old was concerned. She missed quite a bit of time, came back, had that terrible stumble at the start of the victory ride, and then she ran here in a big, big way, finished in 12:85 as opposed to Mia Mischief, who finished in 12:91. Chad has said that Separation of Powers is a real scenario where they stretch her out in distance. I don't know if it'll be a race like the Cotillion. I don't know if it'll be some other position, but there's a chance that she stretches out in distance. Mia Mischief, I think she's the one that you want to take out of this race simply because of the things that I just alluded to. The fact that the main track may have been a little bit closer friendly, the fact that she was out there dueling on the front end, put away the other pace pressure in Classy Act, and then she still only was defeated by a neck. And your third place finisher was one that was coming from well out of it. To me, Mia Mischief is the horse that you want to take out of this. Minute to Stardom, she just didn't seem to pass the test this time around. And she's so lightly raced, and again, no pun intended, she didn't pass the test. She's so lightly raced that I don't want to totally write her off, but I think she does need to regroup and find out if she actually does belong with this level of company. What she had done in those first 3 starts, she looked like she could be anything. Saratoga can also be a little bit of a tough sort of track for horses to ship into, and she was relatively close to the pace as well. So maybe you want to give her a little bit of the benefit of the doubt and not totally write her off just yet. Ultimately, this race, though, it came down to those two horses, Separation of Powers, Mia Mischief, your two betting choices. And I think Mia Mischief ran the better race, and she's the one that I want coming out of this. I've already thrown her in my DRF horse watch. But at the end of the day, Separation of Powers is the one that got all the cash and prizes. She is now a Grade 1 winner as a 3-year-old for Chad Brown and Jose Ortiz. She gets the job done in this year's test. 93 buyer, 116 Timeform US rating. Out to the West Coast we go. Del Mar Thoroughbred Club, fillies and mares going 1 mile and a 16th on the turf course. This is the field for the 65th running of the Yellow Ribbon Handicap. A big field of 11 signed on. Your post-time favorite was Cambodia. Tom Proctor, Drayden Van Dyke. She has had tremendous success down at Del Mar in the past, but a recent form here in 2018, a little bit skeptical, a little bit unsteady, less than stellar to say the least. But to be fair, she'd been facing much better horses out here on the East Coast, whether it was at Keeneland or it was at Belmont Park. Would getting back to Southern California be the trick? Indeed it was. Trevor Denman with the stretch run.
On the outside at the top of the lane, and Cambodia grabs the lead and kicks for home. Cambodia goes on now in the second spot as Madame Stripe. Storm the Hill is on the outside, and then Midnight Crossing. But Cambodia in a masterful performance today, never looked like losing. Cambodia and Drayden Van Dyke take the yellow.
Cambodia gets the job done in this year's Yellow Ribbon over Madame Stripes, who finishes second over Sophie P., who runs third at odds of 14-1. Let's take a look at Cambodia a little bit more in depth. 7 of 18 lifetime, $778,913 in career earnings. Owned by Winter Quarter Farm, trained by Tom Proctor, bred by Don M. Robinson and Maverick Productions Limited in the state of Kentucky, the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Ridden to victory by Drayden Van Dyke, and you can see the pedigree at the bottom of the horse card. She is by Warfront, out of a Smart Strike mare named Sassification. That's a fun name, Sassification. There you have it. Let's talk a little bit about the figures, shall we? 95 buyer speed figure for Cambodia winning this year's Yellow Ribbon. She comes home in 29.69, and really, I don't have a heck of a lot to say about this race as a whole, other than she never looked like a loser. She was kept out in the clear. Van Dyke said he just thought he was in a perfect position. He takes over. She's just basically on cruise control rounding the far turn, and she blows the doors off this field. Now, again, this could be a combination of things. Is this her really liking the Seaside Oval down at Del Mar? Probably a big piece of it. But also, she's getting that class relief. We talked about it a little bit in the stakes preview. Perhaps this is all she needs. She had been facing the Sister Charlies of the world, the Araving Beauties of the world, the 4-star Crooks of the world. Those horses are just better than the horses that are in Southern California. So all of a sudden she comes back here, and the second choice is Madame Stripes, who, look, I picked her and I like her. I think she's interesting. But she was about as late as you're ever going to see a horse change leads, with actually changing leads during the race, and she just was no match whatsoever. I mean, this was a no contest. I mean, we're talking about one horse being here and one horse being here. I like the fact that the connections of Cambodia have already come out and said, when we look at this thing, realistically, Breeders' Cup, Filly Mare Turf, probably too far for her. So let's look at things a little bit differently. First things first, sounds like the John C. Maybe at the end of the meeting is going to be the goal here short term. Long term, though, the goal will be the Matriarch when they come back in the fall. And I think it's realistic. A mile distance, maybe a hair on the sharper side. Maybe she's more of that 8.5, 9 furlong horse. But at the end of the day, she loves Del Mar. You're probably going to get the sort of also-rans exiting the Breeders' Cup. I like anytime connections look at a race and say, you know what, okay, if the Breeders' Cup is not realistic, let's set our sights here on this race, whatever it may be. And even if you get the horses exiting the Breeders' Cup, you know that this race, that race, let's just use the Matriarch as the example, that was not the goal for any of those horses exiting the Breeders' Cup. Horses exiting the Breeders' Cup, the goal was the Breeders' Cup, whether it's the mile or it's the Filly and Mare Turf, whatever else it may be. When you have your sight set on this spot here, that's all you're worried about. These other horses, they were geared up and fired up for something else. You might be getting them on an off situation or coming down from being at their peak as far as being cranked up and ready to go. I love it. And I think it's a realistic approach. She's probably not good enough to win a race like the Breeders' Cup. And also, the distance is not going to work for her. So you know what? Let's play to her strengths. She likes Del Mar. The mile works for her, even if I think she might be better slightly longer. She has a good relationship with Van Dyke. Tom Proctor knows a thing or two about training. I think it's a great situation all around. I think she is going to be one of the horses to beat if she stays in this sort of form. And it sounds like this is probably the last year that she'll run. So hopefully she goes out on a winning note, or on a positive note anyway. Looks like the matriarch at the end of the Del Mar Bing Crosby meeting, the fall meeting, will be the goal for Cambodia. As far as the rest of the field is concerned, again, I don't really have a heck of a lot to add. Madam Stripes was as late as possible with lead change. Hate that. Sophie P showed some late interest. She came home in 29.60. Hallie Bell, she ran all right. Storm the Hill, all right. Ancient Secret, she doesn't want to go this far. Turn her back to going down the hill. I think that's going to be fine for her. Bo Recall was terrible with the blinkers on for the first time. I don't know what you want to do with her at this point. But as far as the rest of the field is concerned, I just kind of shrug and say it's the Southern California fillies and mares on turf. You send somebody out there, send a fresh face out there, they're probably going to be the horse to beat, as is the case with Cambodia. Whenever she shows up on the West Coast, she becomes boss out there. Cambodia, nice horse, always placed in realistic positions, and you have to respect that about the connections. They've done a good job with her. They've handled her well throughout her career. And look, she has found a nice home in Southern California. She loves Del Mar. Sounds like the John C. Maybe is the short-term goal, but the long-term goal will be the Grade 1 matriarch, and that's possibly going to be her final career start. Cambodia, she gets the job done returning to Southern California. She wins down at Del Mar on Saturday, the Yellow Ribbon Handicap, with a 95 buyer. Let's shift our attention to the 3-year-old boys. The West Virginia Derby, to me, this is going to be a fascinating race to discuss because, well, first things first, let's take a look at the field. You had 9 signed on in here. They're going a mile and an eighth. This racetrack at Mountaineer is notorious for their big day being very, very outside, sort of biased. Forget about the rail, but the inner portion of the racing surface is usually like quicksand. So you want to be very, very far off the rail. I don't think that was the case this year around, but I think there was a pretty significant bias that was present on this day, and I think it could greatly alter the way that you need to approach this race when handicapping where these horses come back and in what spots. First things first, here's the stretch run of this year's West Virginia Derby.
The top of the stretch now, and they've got a furlong and a half to go, and Mr. Freeze has kicked away by 4. High North is holding second, followed by Draft Pick, and then comes Lionite, but they're strung out like Brown's cows with 70 yards to go, and Robbie Alvarado wins the West Virginia Derby on Mr. Freeze by about 8 lengths. Second is tight, maybe.
Mr. Freeze gets the job done for Dale Romans by 8 lengths over Draft Pick for Peter Urton, who runs second, and High North runs third, with Florent Giroux aboard at odds of 9-2. Mr. Freeze gets the job done at odds of 6-1. Let's take a look at Mr. Freeze. Really, when you look at what he's done, more or less unblemished. 3 of 4 lifetime, over $434,000 in career earnings. Never been out of the exacta in 4 lifetime starts. Owned by Jim Bach and Gerald Isbister. Trained by Dale Romans. Bred by Sienna Farms LLC in Kentucky. Ridden to victory by Robbie Alvarado. And you see the pedigree at the bottom of the horse card. He is by To Honor and Serve out of a Tabasco Cat mare named Heavenly Cat. From a buyer standpoint, now keep in mind, this was the race that I had talked about in the preview edition last week. You can go back and find that on YouTube or in iTunes. And I said, I'm fascinated by this race because I want to see if any of these 3-year-olds run well enough and prove that perhaps they're an interesting fresh face in a race like the Travers. From a speed figure standpoint, we had a horse that did that, and in a pretty significant way. A 102 buyer speed figure for Mr. Freeze winning this race in gate-to-wire fashion. I say gate-to-wire fashion for a reason, because this racetrack at Mountaineer on Saturday, you go through the charts, there was one horse that won from slightly off the pace, and I mean it was slightly off the pace, and it came going 4.5 furlongs. So I don't even know if you want to incorporate that. Oh, and by the way, the horse that ran second opened up a 4-length lead, but was a bit of a price in there and just got run down by this other horse that won. If you were not on the lead, you had a really difficult time. The 102 buyer is really, really sexy. It's really attractive. But is it legit? He was also incredibly early with his lead change. Generally speaking, that is not a good thing. That, to me, is worse than a late lead change. A late lead change can be for a few different things. And this is a very, very... I don't want to lead anyone down the wrong path, and I'm not saying anything necessarily about this horse specifically. But an early lead change is usually not a good thing. A late lead change, it's not great, but some horses, they just, that's them. Early lead change is usually a kiss of death. It's usually not a good thing going forward. We'll find out. Now, Mr. Freeze, again, he's really done nothing wrong. He's 3 of 4 lifetime, never been out of the exacta. This is just the kind of race that now if he goes into a race like the Travers, he's going to be the fastest horse in the race from a speed figure standpoint, at least in the last race. The 102, Hofberg earned a 100. The other 3-year-olds many of them haven't earned triple digits. Good Magic didn't earn a triple digit when he won the Haskell last weekend. We know that Jim Dandy was a bit of a dumpster fire, from a figure standpoint anyway. Mr. Freeze right now is going to look like one of those horses going into the Travers that might vie for second choice behind Good Magic. The question now you need to decide as a handicapper. Do you believe the 102? Or was this a bias-aided number? Now, was this reminiscent of, and I'll take the beating, was this reminiscent of Mendelssohn, where you earned a giant figure on a track that flattered you? Maybe you're not quite as good as that number would suggest. Time will tell. He ran fast, stopped the clock in 47.95, got his final 1/8 of a mile in 12.62. Galloped out, iffy. Really early with the lead change. This is a fascinating race to see how the horses come out of it and where they all decide to go and how much money each one of them takes. Mr. Freeze is very interesting at 10-1 with a race like this on his page. He's not interesting to me at odds of 3-1. Draft Pick and High North, they were the closest ones in attendance to that pace. The 1-2-3 horses throughout the run finished 1-2-3. So I don't know that I love any of that. Lion, I think, ran very well because he was the only horse that made up ground coming from off of the pace. Now, he was beat by 8 lengths, but I don't want to hold that against him. He was in a photo for second place, and I think there's a scenario where you can look at this race and say, Lionite is the horse that you want coming out of this, but in a realistic spot, in a reasonable spot. Maybe not a race like the Travers or a race like the Pennsylvania Derby, but maybe a race like the Oklahoma Derby down the road, or one of these other sort of a little bit lesser races. Perhaps that's where a horse like this fits in best. Because I think he ran better than the paper was going to suggest, considering the way this racetrack was on Saturday at Mountaineer. Once on Whiskey was terrible in here for Baffert. He was your favorite at odds of 2-1. I don't know what you want to do with this, considering he was slightly off of the pace. And again, considering this track was very, very speed-friendly, I don't know that I totally want to hold it against him, but he never picked his feet up. So this was certainly a dull effort, but he has a bit of an excuse built in already. This is going to be a very, very fascinating race to see and think about going forward, where all these horses show up. If Mr. Freeze goes to the Travers, does he become one of the favorites? And does he become one of the favorites on the heels of a victory that may be a little bit dressed up? Does Draft Pick go on to a spot like the Travers or elsewhere? And you know what? He had the track in his favor, too, if we're going to call a spade. Maybe he wasn't on the lead, but he was pretty darn close to it. High North as well. High North, I don't think wants any part of this distance, and I think the track just kind of carried him around. Lionite, he made up some ground coming from off of it, but truth be told, he's probably not grade 1 level right now. Do you find another spot for him? And again, I think he ran better than it looks. And once on Whiskey, are you ready to write him off and say he was a bit of a one-hit wonder? Or does he have this racetrack sort of in his back pocket and say, that's why he didn't run that well? Very, very interesting race. And you can't deny the number. Mr. Freeze earns a 102 buyer. Whether you think it was pace or speed bias aided or not, And that 102 buyer, that's going to make him one of the favorites wherever he shows up next. Sounds like it could certainly be the Travers. Mr. Freeze gets the job done for Dale Romans in this year's West Virginia Derby. 2-year-old girls in the Sorrento out at Del Mar on Sunday afternoon. 6 furlongs on the main track, a field of 10. Here they are. Lining up, it was an interesting race because your favorites in here, they were maidens. They hadn't actually won a race just yet. Whether you were looking at Del Mar May or Bellafina, they were both highly thought of, highly regarded fillies. They looked good in their career debuts. The question was, would they be able to put it all together? Bellafina also a little bit of an equipment change. Would that be the thing that made the difference? Here is the stretch run of this year's Sorrento.
On the outside, Bougie Girl is coming to chase them. Dragic is along the inside, and then Del Mar May. They come for home. Bellafina still clear out here. Bellafina by 5. Big lengths with a 16 to go, and basically Bellafina just never gave them a chance. Bellafina and Flavion Pratt romp home in the Sorrento. Close for second. Looked like Del Mar May. Then Bougie Girl. Dragic.
Bellafina gets the job done by open lengths. She goes gate to wire beneath Flavian Pratt. She gets the job done at odds of 3-1. The runner-up is the 5-2 favorite, Del Mar May, and the third-place finisher, Bougie Girl. She runs very well at odds of 8-1. Let's take a look a little bit deeper at Bellafina. She is 1 for 2 lifetime. She hasn't been out of the exact in either one of those starts. $128,000 in career earnings, owned by Kaleem Shah Incorporated, trained by Simon Callahan. Bred by JSM Equine LLC in Kentucky, ridden to victory by Flavian Pratt. You see the pedigree at the bottom of the horse card. She is by Quality Road out of a Malibu Moon mare named Akron Moon. I believe this is a full sister to Diamond King, a horse that's done some decent things as a 3-year-old. They paid $800,000 for this filly. They've always thought highly of her. She earns a 94 Beyer speed figure winning the Sorrento. Boy, I'm impressed with how fast these 2-year-olds are. There's a 2-year-old, when we talk about the best buyers from the weekend coming up at the end of the program, these 2-year-olds, they're running big figs. Especially at this point. We're not even talking about the Hopeful and the Del Mar Debutante and those types of races. The Del Mar Futurity, these are the early stakes for the 2-year-olds, and they're running fast. 94 Beyer for Bellafina, winning by 4 and change. Very, very late with the lead change. Certainly a concern, but considering she is as lightly raced as she is, I don't think it's a disaster by any stretch of the imagination. Simon Callahan, also, I found it interesting that he thinks that distance all along, that's what she wants, and she's just doing this on sheer talent alone. That's a scary thought if that ends up being accurate. The lead change, I think she'll iron that kind of thing out. It's also interesting to hear Callahan say there is no guarantee she comes back for the Del Mar Debutante because at the end of the day, they want 2 turns and they are working backwards from the Breeders' Cup. They want year-end awards for Bellafina. That's the goal anyway. So they're working backwards from the Breeders' Cup. How do we get there? If she says that she wants to go in the Debutante, they'll run her in the Debutante. But otherwise, they may wait. You have that race out at Santa Anita, and then that could possibly lead into the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies at Churchill Downs the first weekend in November. Del Mar May has run too well to be a maiden at this point. Reminds me a little bit, not nearly as talented at this point and as fast, but she's run so well in each of her first 2 lifetime starts. Reminds me a little bit of Midnight Bisou last year as a 2-year-old, where she had run so well in those 2 starts, and she just couldn't get past Dream Tree. So there is a race for Del Mar May. Obviously a maiden race. She'll do that at some point if they go that route. But she is still, at this point, she's one of the faster 2-year-old fillies that we have, especially on the West Coast. But in general, she came home in 12:77. She's going to win a race at some point. And I think there's plenty of upside here for this filly. I think she's nice. Bougie Girl, I should say. She was very, very good and very impressive here. She broke like a shot. She was very wide throughout, and she just flattened out down the lane. I think there's a real scenario where you can look at it and say, you know what, if she doesn't have to carry as much ground, she easily finishes second, and she probably doesn't threaten for the victory, but that margin is at least closer and smaller next time around. There are some interesting runners in here. These 2-year-olds, again, the most impressive piece so far is that they are as fast as they are. And the fact that Callahan thinks that Bellafina will be better going 2 turns. The fact that you have a horse like Bougie Girl, who broke as fast as she did, and maybe if she's not compromised by the wide trip, she is a runner-up in a graded stakes race. She's graded stakes place, finishing 3rd. Del Mar May, I do wonder if 7/8 is going to be the distance for her, because her best stride was late. So I do think that all of these girls, I think there's some ability, and I know some people immediately questioned it because your top 2 finishers were maidens coming into it. and you don't have the presence of Brill, and you don't have the presence of Mother. I just think these 2-year-old girls on the West Coast are very, very good right now. Bellafina, a name that you might want to keep in the back of your mind. Again, I know everyone loves Mother and everyone loves Brill. These top 3 girls, I think they're all pretty good. Bellafina gets the job done in the Sorrento for Simon Callahan and Kaleem Shah. 94 Beyer speed figure. May or may not see her in the debutante at the end of the meeting, but the goal at the end of the day, the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies, because they think that she is a legitimate threat and they want some year-end awards for her, namely 2-year-old champion filly. Last race we'll recap here on the recap edition is the La Jolla. These are 3-year-olds on the turf down at Del Mar. It's a grade 3 event, a mile and a 16th. Only a field of 6 signed on, and there was a heavy favorite. A 1-2 shot in River Boyne going out for Pratt and Jeff Mullins. This is a horse that has really done nothing wrong throughout his career. He's been visually impressive throughout. He's a turf horse, a proper turf horse. I've been a fan of his since day one, and he continues to improve, in my opinion, and he sort of saved his best for his most recent start. He continues to take these small steps forward. He looks like a serious racehorse that could end up being something as they continue on with him. Here's the stretch run of this year's La Jolla.
The red now hooked out to the outside. Move overs in with a shot down at the rail. Arawak joining the fray late. Homeward bound and Calyx Man is hanging on. River Boyne on the outside. Inscom between them. River Boyne just puts her head in front as they run to the wire, and River Boyne will win it going away. River Boyne, Arawak.
River Boyne prevails at odds of 1-2 over Arawak, who runs second at odds of 10-1, and Calyx Man, your pace setter, fades to run third at odds of 5-1 in this year's La Jolla. Here is the in-depth look at your winner, River Boyne, Irish bred. He is 5 of 10 lifetime, 7 times in the exact, over $360,000 in career earnings, owned by Red Baron's Barn LLC in Rancho Temes, trained by Jeff Mullins. Bred by Limestone and Terra Studs in Ireland, ridden to victory by Flavian Pratt. See the pedigree at the bottom of the horse card. He's by Dandy Man out of a mark of esteem mare named Clythia? Clytha. Let's go with Clytha, shall we? River Boyne, 93 Beyer speed figure, winning this race here. Again, a 3-year-old restricted race on the turf. Comes home in 29.16. Runner-up Arawak, a 90 Beyer, 28.91 for the final come-home time. I love everything about River Boyne. I always have. This is probably just a very low-hanging fruit comparison because of the connections. Red Baron's Barn, Jeff Mullins, turf. Maybe he's the new it's in the post for these connections. I love everything about him. He's got some versatility, and this wasn't the most comfortable trip throughout because coming off of the first turn onto the backside, they really backed it down up on the front end, and he's in between horses, and Pratt had to absolutely slam on the brakes. He checked a couple of times, had a hammer lock on this horse. He finally relaxed once the pace sort of extended out a little bit again, and he was never really moving like a loser. He was always comfortably handled. Angle him out into the clear. He comes with that nice finish. Distance is no issue for him. Mullins has alluded to the fact that, you know what, Del Mar Derby probably going to be the next spot for him toward the end of the meeting. I just think there's everything that you can't knock anything about this horse. Perhaps he doesn't love cutting the ground. He finished 5th in that race at Churchill on the Derby undercard, but good thing for him, he's in Southern California. I like everything about this horse. He has some tactical ability. He can sit just off the pace and come with a run. He has a nice finish. There are no knocks for my money anyway as far as River Boyne is concerned. I think he is one of the best 3-year-old turf horses in the country. I know that's a bit of an aggressive statement, but I truly believe that. I think he's as good as many of these other horses we see, especially out here on the East Coast for the 3-year-olds. River Boyne, I have nothing but good things to say about him. As far as the rest of the field is concerned, Arawak, he popped back to his left lead at the end of the run, but he ran just fine. Again, I've said it before in stakes previews. I probably haven't given this horse as much credit as he deserves. I don't love Arawak, but he's probably a little bit better than I've given him credit for. At the end of the day, he is no match for River Boyne. I don't think the additional distance out in Del Mar Derby will be an issue for him as either. I just think River Boyne again. I can't keep saying it enough. I think he's a really, really talented 3-year-old, and I like everything about him. He gets the job done in this year's La Jolla Handicap with a 93 Beyer speed figure. We're going to roll it into this week's stakes montage, some of the ones that unfortunately we couldn't go over as far as recaps are concerned. You've got races from Mountaineer, Saratoga, Woodbine, you name it, we've got it. Here you go, this week's stakes montage.
followed by Hawakam. Into the stretch, Leo Frick has battled back and now leads by a neck. Term of Art second. Matt Rue is starting to wind up down the outside. It's Leo Frick a half length in front of Term of Art, followed by Matt Rue. Leo Frick in front. Leo Frick wins the Governors by a head. Term of Art
move at the top of the stretch. Pas de Souci in front. Thundering Sky, Précieuse on the scene with Lido. Uni storming down the center. Here's Précieuse. Here's Uni. These two exploding from the back of the pack. Précieuse and Uni. Précieuse, Uni on the outside. Précieuse and Uni. Uni and Précieuse coming down to the line. These two right to the finish. And Uni did it. Uni ran down.
And Syllable is last, and Tis Breathtaking goes extremely wide. Out in front, Sav has got the lead from Sailing By. Tis Breathtaking flying home, and Tis Breathtaking has released the brakes on the outside, has gone to the front, and an outstanding performance. A breathtaking win. Tis Breathtaking by almost 2. Sav second, Appella third.
Ready for ride, Blind Ambition and Eastwood. They're into the stretch, and Sandy Slew is still on top. Here's Tourmaline on the outside. Disco Partner is down toward the rail. Blind Ambition down the center is next, but Sandy Slew just keeps on going here. Sandy Slew by 3. Blind Ambition into second. Disco Partner is third. Sandy Slew holding on in the Troy. And then it was
Crawl from the bar, down the lane in front by 3 lengths to Muskoka Wonder, who releases the brakes now and is flying home. Muskoka Wonder coming at the rate of knots, and Muskoka Wonder joins Crawl from the bar, running on well Moon Swings, and it is Muskoka Wonder much the best by a length. No excuse, Crawl from the bar. Moon Swings was an eye-catching third, then Super Clickety-clack, a line of 3, and Ghost Suit Arena, a line of 4. Line of Vision taken up, down the outside, Ghost Suit Arena, Line of Vision, they're running on. Clickety-clack's in front from She's Got Fire, Line of Vision, flying home now, and Line of Vision coming. Clickety-clack, Line of Vision on the outside, comes away to win it. Line of Vision, Clickety-clack, She's Got
in front. Outplay on the inside, second. Timeline is third. And then Realm and Patch on the far outside. Kurilov to catch and a furlong to do it. A 2-length lead. Timeline, Realm, Patch on the outside. Outplay back to last. It is Kurilov desperately holding on to this lead. Realm's going to make a race of it. Kurilov, here comes Realm. Here comes the wire. Very close. Heads were up and down.
There you have it, this week's stakes montage on the recap edition of the Matt Bernier Show. Let's dive into the weekend's best Beyer speed figure performances, and I spoke about it a little bit in the Sorrento, but this is a good time to pick it up here when we take a look at them. I'm just very, very interested and impressed with how fast the 2-year-olds are so far. 2-year-old male on dirt, Mucho, for Bill Mott. That horse looked awesome on Saturday afternoon up at the Spa. He earns a 90 Beyer breaking his maiden. You would have to assume a race like the Hopeful is going to be next up for him. Mott, with one of those just classically bred sort of Claiborne pedigrees, top to bottom. This thing could be anything. 90 Beyer for Bill Mott's winner as a 2-year-old on dirt up at the Spot. Bellafina, 94, winning the Sorrento out at Del Mar. 2-year-old males on turf, a little bit slower. Jungle Warrior, 66, breaking the maiden up at Woodbine. 2-year-old filly on turf. Noble Love, 51, in maiden special out at Ellis Park. 3-year-old males on dirt, Mr. Freeze. We spoke about him in the West Virginia Derby, a 102 Beyer. 3-year-old fillies, Separation of Powers. She wins that great stretch battle with Mia Mischief in this year's test. 93 Beyer up at the Spot. 3-year-old males on turf. Weather Report, not winners of one other than a 96 Beyer at Suffolk Downs. 3-year-old fillies on turf. Is Me Lucky, an 83 in an allowance race out at Santa Rosa. Older horses, older males on dirt. Diversify wins the Whitney with a 110 Beyer speed figure. Older fillies, Golden Mischief, a 93 in a stakes race at Mountaineer. Older males on turf. Sandy Slew over a boggy turf course in the Troy. 5.5 furlongs, 102 Beyer, and the older fillies on turf. 3-way tie. Uni and Précieuse. The Chad 1-2, they go in the De La Rose, as well as Cambodia winning the Yellow Ribbon out at Del Mar. All 3 of them earn 95 Beyer speed figures, and there you have it, the weekend's best as far as Beyer speed figures are concerned on the recap edition of the Matt Bernier Show. We're going to button things up here. If you've been listening live on Tuesday, live.drf.com, livestream.com, Daily Racing Forms Twitter handle, at DRF Inside Post, or the Daily Racing Forms Facebook page. Thank you for doing so. If you listen to this in podcast form, like most of you do, YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, video.drf.com, as well as Spotify. If you're over on YouTube, click that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up. If you're over on iTunes, write us a review, give us a positive rating. Always greatly, greatly appreciated. I will be back with the preview edition coming up on Friday at noon, as we always do. Go over a couple of races from this upcoming weekend. I believe this happens to be Arlington Million weekend, so we'll dive into that in a little bit as well, and go over some other big races. Before we wrap this entire thing up, though, let's talk about DRF TV schedule events. You're going to have DRF Bets Races a Day. You're going to have the Watchmaker Watch. You're going to have DRF Players Podcasts. You'll have some exclusive footage. No, I shouldn't say exclusive, but Daily Racing Form produced footage from up at the sale. Phasing Tipton up at Saratoga. You got plenty of things coming your way this week on DRF TV. You can find all that on video.drf.com or the Daily Racing Form's YouTube channel. Now we're going to button this thing up. You want to follow me on Twitter, questions, comments, concerns, at Bernier_Matt. Usually pretty good at taking a look at that. We can get into some things as well. However you play for the rest of the week, until I come back and chat again on Friday. Best of luck however you're playing, whatever you're playing, wherever you're playing. It's been the recap edition of the Matt Bernier Show.